Shalom, dear friends, and welcome to this Torah with an accent, this new proposal to spend some time with friends sharing Torah conversation. My name is Mario Karpuch. I'm a rabbi in Atlanta, Georgia, and I want to start by saying that I'm incredibly excited of this opportunity to have a moment that I know that I will wait every week, in which I get together with friends and colleagues who I love and admire to discuss some Torah and what's going on in our parsha and in our lives, and how do we keep Torah relevant to our lives. We're starting this week, last week of in which we're reading the book of Vayikra in this year, and which I think is very relevant in that sense. And I would love to hear from my colleagues about that. We have read the book of Vayikra in very different ways this year. The fact that we spend most of the book, if not all of the book, while in isolation. We read the stories of Tumah and Tara, purity and impurity, being sick and having to be apart from the community in very different ways that we have done it in other years. And as we're coming to the end of this book, we read this week Behar and Bechukotai. We start the parasha with God saying to Moshe, or speaking to Moshe, and the Torah says specifically that he does that in Mount Sinai. It's the only time in the entire book of Vayikra in which we hear this, God spoke to Moshe in Mount Sinai. And while I read about what Rashi and others have to say about this issue, personally, I was reading this and thinking in terms of what does it tells us, this idea of stopping at Mount Sinai. When we think about the journey of our ancestors, we think they left Egypt and they just walk and walk and walk for a long time. And eventually they go to Sinai. They go to the land of Israel. And yet here the Torah comes and says it was not just traveling. It was not moving from point A to B. It was also stopping at some moments and having to reflect, or having an opportunity, an invitation to think about what was next. And I think it's very relevant that the two things that the Torah tells us today we have to think about is our relationship with the land in terms of the loss of Shemitah, of the cycle of 7 years that the land has to rest, and the Yobel, the Jubilee, every 50 years, and the loss of how to deal with our brothers who are in trouble. How, if I bring something that we were talking earlier with my colleagues here about redemption, what's your role in redeeming those who are in trouble? How do you be partnered with God in doing this? And so I would love to hear from you guys. Your take on this. What basically, how do we take these things that the text is telling us? How do we read this year the text differently based on this experience that we're having? How do we plan for the future after we have been stopped here in this particular kind of Mount Sinai this year?
Well, let me say thank you, Rabbi, for the introduction. And welcome everyone to Nashville, Tennessee. Here we have almost as lovely as an accent as in Atlanta, Georgia. And when I don't know if you agree with me on this, but 2020 may be remembered as the year when Vayikra became relevant. Finally, after so many years of being the book that we, and every bar or bat mitzvah kid didn't want to engage with. Now we have a time that many of the concepts in Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus, are very relevant. So, for example, with what you were saying about the idea of the Behar Sinai, we are in the mountain and God is saying, now you have to work for 6 years and you have to stop on the 7th. It's interesting to see that some commentators, like for example, Rambam, Maimonides, will speak about the fact that the stopping was meant as a social component to help those who are struggling the most, for the needy folks who then come to our fields and pick, our apples or whatever we were harvesting. Then some other folks would say that the main issue here is ecological. We let the earth rest. And then there is people like Rav Kook, who said that the reason why we do Shemitah is because it allows us the opportunity to stop for a full year and try to reshuffle our priorities so that we know where we are and what should we aiming to do moving forward. It's interesting that now that we are in the middle of all this pandemic, the three should come together. It's a time to think about those who are suffering the most. It is a good time to think about climate change and how are we messing with the environment. And it's a good time to reshuffle our priorities, because even if we didn't want it to be, everything stopped. So now we have this opportunity to make interesting decisions regarding our priorities and the way we deal with our own time. So that's it for now.
I think one of the main values that we see through this parsha is the value of justice. And I think that the big question here is, how can we create a more just society? And I think that was relevant for the time of the Torah. And that's also relevant for us today. As Rabbi Karpuf was saying, as Mario was saying, I think that the question is, how are we going to be blessed or fortified after this time that we are experiencing right now? I think that one of the answers is that we should be trying to create a more just society. And we see that through the laws of Shemitah, right? When those that didn't have access to the land, those who didn't have access to the products of the land, the fields were open for them. And then we see that with the Yovel, when slaves were released. And it's like going back to the origin. It's like going back to this first creation of the world, when we were all created in the image and likeness of God, and we were equal in the eyes of God. So today we say a lot that, yes, we are in this together. But what is that together, right? Are we all suffering the same way? Are we all experiencing the same? I think that every person is different. Every circumstances or each circumstance is different for people. So I think that one of the main questions is, how do we transform our society in a more just society? And I think that justice is one of the central elements of this parsha, and certainly one of the central elements of the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. And I think that we are closing this week the reading of the book of Leviticus with this idea of creating, or this invitation of creating, a more just society for us and also for future generations.
Hi, everybody. I am Rabbi Manes Kogan from Hillcrest Jewish Center here from Queens. And just a wonderful opportunity. Let me just begin by saying to be with friends. And friends here that we are sharing the screen, but also friends who are listening to this exchange. I like just to take it on following on the same idea of Shemitah, to take it to another aspect of Shemitah, and of the Shemitah and the Yovel, that where we read Veshaftem ish el achuzato. Every person should come back to his inheritance. In a literal sense, is coming back to your land, to your piece of land that you lost. And just to think that that life takes us through different iterations, through different journeys, and in these different journeys we get lost sometimes. We lose our way, we lose our land, we lose our place, we lose connections. And for me, always this pasuk was very, very strong, this verse, because it reminded me and reminds me that we all have a place where we need to go back. For some of us, is to go back to our sense of family, is to go back to the dinner table to be together with the people that we love the most, is to be and go back to what we value the most, and perhaps throughout the year we get lost in things that are less important. For many of us, is coming back to our Jewish roots, to our Judaism, to our tradition. And I like just to say that while we cannot celebrate, and we should not celebrate the difficult times that we are going through, and we hope that they will really end very soon, that we can pause for a minute and just to see how each of us was able to come back to something that perhaps is very important in our lives and we did not realize. And just to add one more thing about technology and how new opportunities are open for all of us, is to reflect with you how this ability of sharing things through Zoom or Facebook, how is allowing to many people to come back and to reconnect. I don't know what is your experience, but at Hillcrest we have many people who, for some reasons, they did not connect to the way we did things before. They did not come to classes in person, they did not come davening in person, and somehow right now they are finding their way back to the shul, to friends, to the congregation. So for me, this is where the Shaftem Ish El Achuzato, and everybody should come back to his or her own inheritance, takes a new meaning.
Thank you, Rabbi Kogan. I am Rabbi Fabian Werbing from Congregation Bethel in Bethesda. And guys, it's a pleasure being with you. You really have an accent. So I don't know, I can hear it. And I think the Torah puts the accent especially in this parsha, the first one that we read this Shabbat in Behar. I hope I'll get to Bechukotai a little bit later, or we'll get to Bechukotai a little bit later. But I think when the Torah talks about Shemitah, is also encouraging on one more level, if I may add to all that you just said, and is that it encourages us to see who we are when we are not working. It takes 1 year of us. It's the same of Shabbat, the same concept of Shabbat. It requires us to stop what we are doing, to reflect, to think of who is the person who is behind the lawyer, the doctor, the rabbi, the teacher, or whatever you do for a living, and stop for 1 year in this case, or for 1 day every week, to say, okay, let me think, let me reflect, who is this person who is behind these special garments that we wear during the week? And we have seen this being at home more frequently now that we are kind of homebounded, most of us, that we are discovering who we are in a different way. So the Torah is encouraging us by being on top of the mountain, reminding us, saying, you are on top of the mountain. Remember who you are when you are up there. And up there, it means the highest point of the week should be Shabbat, and we should be taking it seriously and reflecting on who is the person who each of us are. So I really appreciate the time that we have to talk together. I think it's a great experience, and I enjoy it very much. So now I leave it to Mario Karpuch, Rabbi Karpuch. So as you may have seen, all the rabbis who starts with their last name starts with a K speak first, and I have the last word. So I'm so glad my last name starts with a W.
Yeah,
I love your accent, by the way.
Which accent? I actually was thinking, I love what you were saying, each one of you. Talking about Yovel, particularly that Rabbi Cohen was speaking about, we know, or we think we know, that it was not really very practical, and we don't even know that if it was or not ever applied. Our rabbi and teacher, my rabbi and our teacher, Rabbi Felipe Yaffe, always reminded me that by the time that King David comes to power, he comes held by Reikim Ufochazim, those who are empty, who have nothing. So clearly they didn't go back to their land. And in a way that's irrelevant, if they came or not. The opportunity we have now is, how do we create a more justice society, as Rabbi Kormis was saying? How do we think about community and our relationship with the land? How do we think about the world that we want to create, even if we cannot actually fully build it? But at least we can start thinking of, in terms of, are we doing our work in order to try to bring that closer to our reality? And I think that that's where the Torah becomes so relevant now.
Well, it's like Rabbi Shai Held from Machon Adar, he writes about this idea that Shabbat is one of the major revolutions that we brought to the world, that Judaism brought to the world, because once a week we get the chance to stop working, because we assume that the world is perfect, and so there's nothing that we need to do. He's quoting, it's Greenberg and whatnot. And he says, when you do Shabbat in a way that, neither the poor nor the rich will touch any money, and so it's an equalizer, and everyone will rest, even, you and your slave, we don't have any more slaves, but servants and people, and every worker needs to stop, no matter what. He says, on that time, once a week, which is what Fabian, Rabbi Waring was saying too, we get this weekly chance to reflect on those things, and maybe also a checkup on where we are in terms of what needs to be done once Shabbat is over. And something that is very interesting, because Shabbat probably was a revolution, because for the first time ever, we have these people saying everyone needs to stop for one day. The first, one of the first anti-Semitic attacks to the Jews before the times of the Common Era is that the Jews are lazy because they rest on Shabbat. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because probably those people writing those things probably got a ton of slaves doing the work for them. So they were having a Shabbat all week long. But Shabbat is meaningful because you stop to work, but at the same time, the other side of the coin is, for those who do not work, Shabbat is extended torture. So how can we think about Shabbat in the context of those who are not working because of what's going on? Right now in this country, we see numbers skyrocketing. So what does it mean, Shabbat, for people who do not have the chance to be part of the working force? And how can we use this idea of Shabbat to remember that it is very important to rest, but it is also very important to work and to have access to a dignified job that will bring meaning to people's lives.
And then during Shemitah, you have to share all the resources that you have so everybody can have food, that everybody can have that, security, that they will know where their next meal will come from. So those
I think that there is a myth of this equalizer. I think that we like to think about Shemitah and Shabbat as equalizers, but I think Rabbi Kuliok, Josue, and Rabbi Karpuch Mario, they were talking about this idea that not everybody suffers in the same way, and we need to be honest and understand that that Shemitah did not erase the barriers completely between poor and rich. That those who had resources before Shemitah had a better Shemitah than those who didn't have, and that those who have steady jobs, their Shabbat is more meaningful, as Rabbi Kuliok was saying, that those that are using the Shabbat to think on all the things that they don't have or the possibilities that they don't have. So, and the same, by the way, about COVID-19. We find out that, yes, we are all on the same boat, but we are not exactly on the same boat. People who have more resources, who have more access to medical resources, or to living in less congested areas, are having more possibilities than people who don't.
Or less crowded homes.
It's important that we don't idealize this idea of the equalizer, like everybody goes back to point zero. I think that if anything, we need to know that at least situations like Shemitah, or what we are going now through with COVID-19, makes us feel a little and make us a little aware of how the other person could be feeling during the rest of the year. For example, we cannot go to places that we want to go. I cannot travel, even though, let's say that you have the money to travel, you can still not travel today. So in this regard, we are on the same boat. But I think that we need to be very, very careful not to play this idea that there are situations that are equalizer for everybody, but I think that can make us more aware and more sensitive, if any.
Yeah, I agree with you, and certainly, the virus has shown us, the virus does not discriminate, and somehow those who suffer the most are the most vulnerable among everyone. So the virus doesn't discriminate. Those who are suffering the most are the most vulnerable in our society. That brings the ball back to us, which I think it's the idea of Shemitah, and the idea of Shabbat is not to idealize or romanticize a fake equality. Is the idea that we become aware of those gaps that are there, and maybe it's a call to action to see what we can do in order to make sure that that doesn't get replicated. So it's actually showing what's needed, what needs to be done.
And I think there is another element, and it's when the Torah speaks about Shemitah in this parsha, it says Shabbat la Hashem, right? It says a day of or a time of rest of the land, in this case, for God. So I think that when you have this notion, this idea, and this conception that God is there, and God is asking you to be responsible for those who are suffering, when you have this added value that it's not only, it's not only to let the earth rest. It's not only to cancel the debts between people, as the Torah would say. It's the notion that there is something that you are responsible to do, and you're responsible for those who are suffering right now in our society. And that's why I think, going back to what Rabbi Kogan was saying before, I think that we are experiencing very challenging times, but at the same time, we are experiencing the best of so many people, right? So many people who are putting their lives at risk. First responders, nurses, doctors, people that are leading our towns and cities, and they are putting their lives at risk because they want to serve other people, and they want to serve their community, because they have this sense of responsibility, and many of them, they know that they are responding to a divine call to serve the others who are suffering right now. So in my view, it's not only let the land rest, it's also bringing it to this notion that God is showing us a path forward. God is, helping us to cope with this test, this challenge, in order to help us to build a better world.
Can you hear me now? So I wanted to, if one of the words that we've been using the most in these days is pivoting. And I wanted to pivot based on what has been said and brought up, and a little bit connect, because we can see the good and the bad. And if I may use an extra polarization, if I'm extending the terms, we can see the blessings and the curses in all this situation. And it's what we read in the second parasha that we read this week. I think you guys in South America read the same thing that we're here reading in America, yes? Because from your accent, you sound like you're from South America. Anyway, joking. I had to. Anyway, so we're all rabbis in America, just in case I'm clarifying that. Anyway, so the second parasha that we read this week is Bechukotai, and it starts on chapter 26 of Vayikra, and it says, "In Bechukotai telechu." If you go with in my ways, with my rules, and it starts with an if, a potential, and then we have a short list of blessings. And what attracted me the most is that all the list of blessings starts with the letter Aleph, im bechukotai, if you follow, and it ends with the word ba'olech etchem komemiut, with the letter Taf. So the blessings start with an Aleph and end with a Taf. The blessings can be endless, can accomplish all the spectrum from Aleph at Taf. And then we have the parts of the curses. It says ve'im lo tishmeu li, if you don't hear me, start with the letter Bav. Okay, and the long list of curses, the tochacha, or the long list of bad things that may happen. We'll leave aside by this moment the theology. They start with letter Bav and ends with the words Leinei Elohim, liot lahem leElohim, ani Hashem. Ends with the word hey. So it's like the word is upside down in the curses. So it's so narrow, the margin of action that we have while we are in the curses, and it's so wide and open the possibilities we have when we present ourselves as a blessing and present the possibility of living a life of blessing. So again, back on the topic of Behar and connecting to Bechukotai, we can see all this as an opportunity and as a blessing in the good ways of how we are going to bring the best of us, or we can just have the world upside down and see it as a curse.
Do you know when you were talking, I remember that beautiful line in the Talmud. There is a line in Masechet Shabbat, in the Tractate of Shabbat, that we are those doing Daf Yomi are reading Masechet Shabbat. I'm not, but I've done it. And do you remember the piece where it speaks about Emet Vasheker? Because it's very similar. It says the letters for Emet, Aleph, Mem, Taf. It's the beginning, the middle, and the end, and of the alphabet, and it is steady, because the Aleph, the Mem, and the Taf, they all have like a structure in the way it is built, that they are steady. They go through, and they are the foundations are like spread over and strong. Sheker, which is Hebrew for lie, is Shin, Kuf, Reish, all together with a very unsteady base, because the Shin, the Kuf, they don't, it's kind of
one point of standing up, right?
Correct. So it's very hard for them to, it's like in Spanish, because we all speak Spanish, and everyone who's listening to us should, because why not? They would be speaking Spanish with an accent. Is la mentira tiene patas cortas, so the lie has short legs, and it's very unstable. So when you were talking about curses and blessings, I was thinking to myself, okay, this is very similar to this idea on the Talmud regarding truth and lies.
And also the verse in the Psalm, Emet me'eret titzmach. So, it's going to be grounded, the truth, and it's going to be grounded as well.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking what Rabbi Werben was bringing, that traditionally we think of curses and blessings like two very different situations. Like, if, and in a way the parasha presents it like that. If you do this, blessings. If you do that, courses. But the reality we have now, it's one that you can both see as a curse or a blessing. And if you can only see curses around you, it's an upside world in which there's nothing you can do. You feel between a bob and a hay, like there's no space there. If you start looking around and you're seeing the blessings around you, suddenly you have the entire alphabet to work with. And there is something there that I think that Rabbi Cormis was talking about, the best of people come out. There is something there about the possibilities that these type of situations present in order to show the best. I keep counting my blessings, the blessings of community, of technology, that we can get together and do this, and being in different cities and different places and talking to each other. And
that's exactly what I was trying to say, and you say, because your English is much better, you've been longer than me here, so that's exactly, and you took my words, the words from
but
my...
he said it with the same accent than you.
I like just to challenge you, dear colleagues and friends. I think that because we are all, because of the suffering around, we like to focus on the blessings. And I like to tell myself also, and I think we are talking about that, which is the equivalent of see the half glass full. I think that I'm just presenting this as a challenge. I think that we need to be careful. I think it's okay for me to tell myself, Manes, count your blessings, see the blessings, and I agree with Rabbi Karpuk, the blessings of community, the blessings of technology, the blessings of togetherness, the blessings of creativity, the blessings of wonderful people around me doing a wonderful job. I think that for me, to get strength myself, it works okay. And I think, again, I want to invite you, to invite everybody. I think this is a good exercise. I think that is a difference when we see ourselves, that I can say myself, count your blessings, Manes. It's very different than to say this to me, than when I see your suffering, to say, count your blessings. I think that when we see the suffering in the other, and there is a lot of suffering, and again, I don't think that we need to minimize that. I think that with all the technology, with all the peace, with all the family unity, with all the community, cannot supplement or cannot bring the blessings of all the people who are dying, who are suffering, the people who cannot see their parents because they're separate physically. And I think that it's important that we recognize the suffering, and we know that there are two ways of action. When it comes to ourselves, I think it's okay to say, count your blessings, look at the positive. But when we come to the other person, I think that our job, both our jobs as rabbis and for each of us who is a member in the community, the task is to provide comfort, is to provide that is missing there. I think if the other person comes up with this idea of blessings in your life, in our lives, I think it's wonderful. But I don't like to be the person who is telling to someone who is suffering, count your blessings. I think that it's my job to provide comfort to that person and to hold that person and to also feel the pain of that person, understanding that there is pain there. I think that coming back to another part of this Torah portion, really at the end, we say Hazak, Hazak, Venit Hazek. Really, this is the last three words that are actually out of the Torah portion, in which we strengthen each other. And by me strengthening you, by helping you become stronger, then we all become stronger. But again, coming back to this, I think that it's very important that we don't simplify things by saying, just look at the half glass full when people are suffering.
Well,
I would like to react to what you are saying, Rabbi Kogan, and I fully agree with you, but I don't think there is a recipe for suffering and there is not a recipe for blessing. I think that this is very, very personal, and I think that each person is right now experiencing this as huge suffering or huge possibilities that are opening, and I think that as you mentioned, when we come to this understanding that we are interconnected, that we have this responsibility of taking good care of each other, I think that when we have a listening ear, when we have a word of support, when we send a text message asking, how are you doing? Is there anything I can do for you? Or when we deliver food or flowers or whatever it is to people who are isolated and the elderly in our community, we're trying to transform that personal suffering into a personal opportunity to support those who are in need. And I am reading the Tochecha, I'm reading the warnings this year in a whole different light. You know, the Tochecha is repeated again in the Torah later, in Parashat Kitavo, in the book of Deuteronomy. There's a crucial difference between both. There is a difference between the way that the warnings are enumerated here in the book of Leviticus and there in the book of Deuteronomy. And the difference is that here, the warnings are given in a plural way to the people, to a group of people, atem. In the book of Deuteronomy, there are for the individual, ata. So it's interesting that we see this connection between the individual and the group. We see this connection between the singular and the plural. Even during this time of challenges, right? We see that we are all interconnected, and there is not a recipe, again, for suffering. There's no recipe for blessings, but as long as we see ourselves belonging to something greater than ourselves, and we can, mix both the singular and the plural, we can probably see the blessing that can emerge from this challenging time.
And I want to accept the challenge that you brought, Rabbi Kogan, and I want to say that I don't want to present this as a either or option. I think it's a yes and option. We can be the one comforting, and we can also be the one who can say, and also you should count the blessings. And that gives, I think, circles back in a way and says, okay, yes, we bring the comfort, but we also want to encourage the people to count the blessings. It's not one or the other. It could be a combination of both in our role, because we all know that it's part of our task to support, but also to open the eyes of people and make them see where they can go. So that's how I would approach and I accept the challenge. So it's better than the ice bucket challenge or other challenges that we had in time. I challenge you next time, Rabbi Kogan, I can send you via FedEx or something. I will challenge you. I'll send you my soccer team shirt and you will wear it next time. What do you think about that challenge?
That's a difficult challenge. We don't want to go into that because we said only half an hour. We are 38 minutes into this and we can go for hours if we do that. I wanted to say, Rabbi Kogan, to also responding to your challenge that in this, when you started talking about that, I was brought to the story of the same generation that was at Sinai when they go to the sea and they see the Egyptians coming right after them. In one of my favorite scenes in the entire Torah, they go to Moshe and says, oh, there were not enough room in Egypt to bury us all, that you brought us here to die, right? And they all cry, and the only thing they can see is curses and doom. And Moshe, right, he's from God saying, Mati tzak elai, why are you crying to me? Stop crying, do something, move. And it's not diminishing that you are in the midst of a crisis. It's not that there are not curses in the world. It's not that there are not problems. But if we fall into just crying because of the curses, there's no room to start moving ahead. And without diminishing the suffering of anyone, at the same time, there is no possibility as a community, as a collective, to start working together towards the future. Rabbi Kulok, do you want to close us for today?
So, I would say two quick things. number one, I accept the rabbi's challenge and what everyone said. I think that what Manes is also pointing to is a good time for us as rabbis, but mostly as human beings, to also connect to our own suffering, to our own pain. Many times we are supporting so many of our congregants that we try to put like a face that everything is fine, and this should be a time for everyone to work with his or her vulnerabilities, to recognize that there is brokenness all around, and to be able to see some light. There's a crack, that's how the light gets in, and that's one. And the thing that I wanted to actually close with is, have you ever been to Philadelphia? I have never been to Philadelphia, so it's actually probably you all. I'm the newest I'm the new kid on the block. But you know, or probably you've seen the Liberty Bell, right?
It's where they make the cheese too, yes?
What?
Where they make the cheese.
Yeah.
That's what you're, yeah.
Yeah. So the Liberty Bell has this verse from our Parsha, from the first one, which is interesting because the translation doesn't allow us actually to go deeper into the meaning of this. The Liberty Bell, which was actually to celebrate the Jubilee year of Pennsylvania in 1751. I did my homework. It says something like, "You shall proclaim the liberty, etc., etc., etc." In Hebrew, the word is ukeratem dror ba'aretz. So the word dror is not the usual word for freedom, liberty, or release. So the Rashi quotes the Talmud in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, the tractate of Rosh Hashanah, and quotes the saying of Rabbi Yehuda. And why do we know, or how do we know that dror is freedom? And Rabbi Yehuda said, it is like a man who dwells medayer. So dror comes from medayer, in any dwelling, dayara, and moves merchandise around the entire country. So what is freedom? Freedom is the ability to be moving from here to there. So we are not there yet, and we shouldn't go there until it is safe to be there. But may we see soon enough the days in which we can actually call Bekeratem Dror Ba'aretz, when we are allowed once again, when it is safe for everyone, without putting anyone's lives at risk, to move from here to there. And maybe we will be lucky enough to do one of these one day under one same roof. So,
Amen.
And to that.
there you go.
Amen.
Okay.
So with that,
So we would like to invite everyone to join us on Thursdays, 5 p.m. East, 4 p.m. Central Time. So join us, and we would like to interact more with our viewers, right? So next time, probably we can take some comments or questions from our Facebook pages and try to answer or try to comment on some of the posts that you have.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Take care.